The November air in San Antonio carried the scent of mesquite and anticipation. Outside the Frost Bank Center, workers moved with practiced efficiency, unloading equipment from massive trucks, while the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Inside, the venue was a symphony of preparation. Cables snaking across the floor, sound technicians testing microphones, lighting crews adjusting spotlights that would soon illuminate one of country music's most enduring legends. Daniel Foster stood in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, his weathered face etched with lines that spoke of 3 decades in the music business. At 57, he had produced hundreds of shows, but this one felt different. This wasn't just another concert. This was George Strait's special anniversary performance, celebrating 54 years of marriage to Norma. And Daniel had been entrusted to make it perfect. "Daniel, we need your approval on the stage setup," called out Vincent Hayes, the stage manager, a burly man with graying temples and a no-nonsense attitude. Daniel walked toward the main stage, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. The setup was impressive, a semicircular platform that would bring George closer to the audience, with carefully positioned monitors and a backdrop featuring subtle, elegant lighting. Yet something gnawed at Daniel's concentration, pulling his thoughts away from the technical details that usually consumed him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another text from his wife, Catherine. He didn't need to read it to know what it said. They had been having the same argument for months now. A slow erosion of the foundation they had built over 23 years of marriage. She felt invisible, she said. He was always working, always prioritizing everyone else's grand moments, while their own life together had become a series of missed dinners and separate bedrooms. "Looks good, Vincent," Daniel said, forcing himself to focus. "But move the center mic stand back another 2 feet. George likes room to move when he talks to the crowd." Vincent nodded and gestured to his crew. Daniel checked his watch. 3 hours until doors opened, 5 until showtime. His stomach tightened. Catherine had asked him point-blank last night, "Do you even want to save this marriage?" He hadn't answered. The silence had been answer enough. Across the venue, in a quiet corridor reserved for media personnel, Rebecca Cole sat in a plastic chair, reviewing her notes on a laptop balanced on her knees. At 42, she had built a reputation as one of the most insightful music journalists in Texas, writing for the Austin Chronicle and occasionally contributing to Rolling Stone. Her specialty was finding the human stories behind the music, the vulnerable truths that artists usually kept locked away. Today, she was working on a long-form piece about lasting relationships in the music industry, a topic that had become painfully personal. Her own marriage had ended 2 years ago, dissolved not in dramatic fashion, but in a quiet acknowledgement that they had become strangers sharing an address. Her ex-husband, Patrick, had been kind about it, which somehow made it worse. There was no villain in their story, just 2 people who had slowly drifted apart while believing they were building something permanent. Rebecca had scored an interview with George Strait after the show, a rare opportunity given his legendary privacy. She wanted to understand how he and Norma had sustained their love through decades in an industry that chewed up marriages and spit them out like yesterday's set list. What was their secret? Was there a secret? Or was it simply luck, compatibility, and the determination to weather whatever storms came their way? Her phone rang. Her editor, pushing for the article's angle. "Rebecca, I need to know you're going to get something real from him, not just the usual, 'we work hard at it' platitudes. We need authenticity." "I know, Jack," Rebecca replied, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I'm going to ask the questions nobody else asks. That's why he agreed to talk to me." She hoped that was true. Rebecca had built trust over the years, had proven she could write about artists with depth and respect. But there was always a risk. Push too hard, and the subject would retreat. Don't push enough, and you're left with a shallow piece that says nothing. Backstage, in the band's rehearsal area, James Walker sat with his guitar, fingers absently plucking out a melody he couldn't quite complete. At 31, James was one of the younger members of George's touring ensemble, a session guitarist who had worked his way up through countless bar gigs and studio sessions before landing this coveted position 3 years ago. He should have been thrilled. Playing with George Strait was a dream for any country musician. But lately, James found it hard to feel much of anything except a dull, persistent ache. His divorce from Kelly had been finalized 6 weeks ago, and he was still reeling from the reality of it. They had been married for only 4 years, together for 7. And somewhere along the way, the promises they had made had turned into accusations and resentment. Kelly had said he loved music more than he loved her. James had denied it, but in quiet moments like this, he wondered if she had been right. He had chosen the tour over her birthday last year, had missed their anniversary because of a recording session, had prioritized every opportunity to advance his career, while she had slowly stopped asking him to stay. "Hey, Walker, you good?" James looked up to see Trevor Daniels, the band's drummer, leaning against the doorframe. Trevor was in his mid-40s, solid and reliable, with the kind of easy confidence that came from years of steady work and a happy home life. "Yeah, just running through some things," James said, managing a half-smile. Trevor stepped into the room, his expression sympathetic. "Listen, man, I know you're going through it right now, but tonight's going to be special. George has something planned, something big. Try to be present for it, you know?" James nodded, though he wasn't sure he knew how to be present anymore. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life, watching himself go through the motions without really feeling connected to any of it. "I'll be ready," James said, and Trevor clapped him on the shoulder before heading back toward the main stage area. Alone again, James looked down at his guitar. Music had been his first love, his constant companion since he was 15 years old. But now it felt tainted, associated with everything he had lost. He wondered if George Strait had ever felt this way, if there had been moments when the road had threatened to take everything from him, and if so, how had he held on? By 6 o'clock, the Frostbank Center was buzzing with energy. Fans streamed through the entrance, a sea of cowboy hats and boots, their faces lit with excitement. Many had traveled hours to be here, had planned this night for months. George Strait wasn't just a performer to them, he was a living legend, a connection to the authentic heart of country music that seemed increasingly rare in an era of pop crossovers and auto-tuned vocals. Daniel Foster watched from the production booth, checking and rechecking every detail. The lights were calibrated, the sound system balanced, the security team briefed. Everything was in place. Yet his personal life remained in chaos, an unsolved problem he had no idea how to fix. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked at it. Catherine's text was simple. "I need to know if you're willing to fight for us, because I can't do this alone anymore." Daniel stared at the words, his chest tight. 23 years, 2 daughters, now grown, a home filled with memories. How had they arrived at this point? When had the distance between them become so vast that he couldn't see a way back? He typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally putting the phone away. Not now. He couldn't deal with this now. There was a show to produce, a legend to honor. His personal crisis would have to wait. But deep down, Daniel knew that's exactly what Catherine was talking about. Everything always had to wait. Rebecca Cole had positioned herself in the media section, close enough to the stage to observe every detail, but far enough back to maintain professional distance. Around her, fans chatted excitedly, sharing stories of the first time they had seen George perform, recounting favorite songs and memorable concerts. There was a reverence in the air, a collective understanding that they were in the presence of something rare and genuine. She thought about the questions she would ask after the show. How do you keep love alive when you're constantly apart? What do you do when the demands of your career threaten the foundation of your personal life? How do you know when to prioritize your partner over your passion? These weren't just questions for George Strait. They were questions Rebecca was still asking herself, trying to understand where she and Patrick had gone wrong. They had loved each other once. She was certain of that. But love alone hadn't been enough. There had been no dramatic betrayal, no explosive fights, just a slow, sad fading, like a photograph left too long in the sun. James Walker stood in the wings with the rest of the band, his guitar strapped on, his heart beating faster as showtime approached. He had performed hundreds of times, but tonight felt weighted with significance he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was Trevor's words about George having something special planned. Maybe it was his own raw emotional state, making everything feel more intense and fragile. George Strait walked past, heading toward his position at stage right. He paused, noticing James, and gave him a nod and a small smile. There was something in that gesture, a recognition, an acknowledgement of shared humanity that made James's throat tighten unexpectedly. George Strait was known for his professionalism, his consistency, his ability to deliver night after night without fail. But he was also known for his privacy, for keeping his personal life shielded from the public eye. What would it take for a man like that to open up, to be vulnerable in front of thousands? The house lights dimmed. The crowd erupted in cheers that shook the building. Daniel Foster, watching from the booth, gave the final signal. Rebecca Cole leaned forward, her journalist's instincts engaged. James Walker took a deep breath, his fingers finding their positions on the guitar strings. And George Strait stepped onto the stage, into the light, into the roar of adoration from people who had followed his journey for decades. The band launched into the opening notes of a classic, and the show began. But none of them, not Daniel, not Rebecca, not James, knew that in 2 hours everything would shift, that George Strait would do something he had never done before, that the carefully maintained boundary between public performance and private truth would dissolve in a moment of raw, powerful honesty that would leave the entire arena in stunned silence. The show was underway, but the real story had yet to begin. The first hour of the concert unfolded like a masterclass in country music. George Strait moved through his catalog with the ease of a man who had done this thousands of times, yet each song felt fresh, delivered with genuine emotion and respect for the audience that had made his career possible. The Frost Bank Center pulsed with energy, couples swaying together, longtime fans singing every word, younger audience members discovering why this man was called the King of Country. From the production booth, Daniel Foster managed the technical flow with practiced precision. He coordinated lighting cues, monitored sound levels, and communicated with his team through his headset. To anyone watching, he was completely focused, a professional at the top of his game. But his mind kept drifting, replaying the conversation he and Catherine had 3 nights ago. They had been in the kitchen, the place where their most important discussions always seemed to happen. Catherine had been chopping vegetables for a dinner he probably wouldn't be home to eat, and she had put down the knife with a deliberate care that signaled something serious was coming. "Daniel, I've been offered a position in Denver," she had said, her voice steady, but her eyes uncertain. "It's a significant promotion, the kind of opportunity I've worked toward for years." He had congratulated her, asked about the details, calculated in his head how they could manage with her in Colorado while he stayed in San Antonio. Catherine had watched him thinking, planning, problem-solving, and then she had said the words that had been echoing in his head ever since. "I haven't accepted yet, because I need to know if you want me to stay. Not for logical reasons, not because it's complicated or inconvenient for you. I need to know if you want me, us, enough to ask me not to go." Daniel had frozen. Part of him wanted to shout yes, to grab her and promise to change, to be more present, to prioritize their marriage above everything else. But another part of him, the part that had been shaped by years of putting work first, had remained silent, calculating the implications, considering the fairness of asking her to sacrifice such an opportunity. That silence had been devastating. Catherine had nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had already suspected, and had gone back to making a dinner they would eat in separate rooms. Now, watching George Strait perform a love song with such authenticity, Daniel felt a sharp pain in his chest. When had he stopped being able to express what he felt? When had he become so trapped in logistics that he couldn't simply say, "I love you, please don't go"? His headset crackled. "Daniel, we're approaching the midpoint. George is signaling for a brief pause after the next song." "Copy that," Daniel replied, pushing his personal thoughts aside once again. But they wouldn't stay buried much longer. Down in the media section, Rebecca Cole was watching George with the trained eye of someone who made her living reading between the lines. There was something different tonight, a quality to his performance that went beyond the usual excellence. Between songs, when he addressed the crowd, there was a vulnerability in his voice, a slight tremor of emotion that she suspected most people didn't notice. But that set her journalist's instincts on alert. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick note. He's building towards something. More emotional than usual. Personal? Rebecca knew that George rarely deviated from his professional persona during shows. He was warm with his audience, appreciative, genuine, but he maintained boundaries. His marriage to Norma was legendary precisely because he had protected it so fiercely from public scrutiny. In an industry where celebrities turned their relationships into publicity opportunities, George and Norma had remained remarkably private. So, what was different tonight? Rebecca thought about her ex-husband, Patrick. They had been so careful with each other, so respectful and considerate, that they had forgotten how to be passionate. Their marriage had been comfortable, pleasant even, right up until the moment they both realized comfort wasn't enough. There had been no infidelity, no cruelty, no dramatic rupture, just a gradual recognition that they were business partners in life rather than lovers, friends rather than spouses. The divorce had been amicable. They had divided their assets fairly, had remained cordial, had even had coffee together a few times since the papers were signed. But Rebecca felt haunted by the loss, by the question of whether they could have saved it if they had been willing to be messier, more vulnerable, less concerned with being reasonable. Was that what George and Norma had figured out? The willingness to be unreasonable in their devotion to each other? To prioritize their marriage even when logic suggested other paths? On stage, George finished a song and paused, taking a long drink of water. The crowd cheered and he smiled, but Rebecca noticed something in his eyes, a depth of feeling that seemed to be pressing against the surface, seeking release. "Thank you," George said into the microphone, his distinctive voice filling the arena. "You all have been with me for a long time, through a lot of years and a lot of songs. Tonight means something special, and I'm going to explain why a little later. But right now, I want to keep playing for you." The crowd roared their approval, but Rebecca made another note. "He's setting something up. Big reveal coming." Backstage, James Walker had just finished his part in an upbeat number, and was catching his breath in the wings. Sweat dampened his shirt, and his fingers ached slightly from the intensity of the playing. But the discomfort was welcome. It was something real to feel, a sensation that broke through the numbness that had become his default state since the divorce. Trevor Daniels appeared beside him, offering a bottle of water. "You're playing great tonight, man. Really feeling it." James took the water gratefully. "Thanks," trying to stay in the moment. "Kelly would be proud," Trevor said, then immediately looked like he regretted it. "Sorry, that was—" "It's okay," James interrupted, though his chest tightened. "Actually, I don't know if she would be. She stopped being proud of my music a long time ago. I think it just reminded her of everything I wasn't giving her." Trevor was quiet for a moment, then said, "My wife Linda and I went through a rough patch about 10 years ago. I was drinking too much, staying out late, basically being an idiot. She told me she was done, packed a bag, went to her sister's place." James looked at him in surprise. He had always thought of Trevor's marriage as rock solid. "What happened?" James asked. "I had a choice to make," Trevor said simply. "I could tell myself she was being unreasonable, that she didn't understand the pressures of this life, that I deserved to blow off steam however I wanted. Or I could acknowledge that I was screwing up the most important thing in my life and actually change, not just promise to change." "What did you do?" "I went to her sister's house, sat on the porch for 4 hours until she agreed to talk to me. And I didn't make excuses. I didn't explain or justify. I just said, 'You are more important than anything else, and I'm going to prove that to you every day for the rest of our lives.'" James felt a lump in his throat. "And she believed you?" "Eventually," Trevor said, "but only because I backed it up with actions. I got help for the drinking. I came home after gigs. I started treating our marriage like it was the most important gig I'd ever have, because it is." James wanted to say that it was too late for him and Kelly, that they were already divorced, that the damage was irreversible. But he wondered if that was true, or if it was just easier than facing the terrifying vulnerability of admitting he had been wrong and begging for another chance. "George knows," Trevor said quietly, "about prioritizing what matters. He's about to show everybody exactly what that looks like." Before James could ask what he meant, they were signaled back to their positions. The show was moving into its second hour, approaching whatever moment George had been building toward. In the audience, people were lost in the joy of live music, in the connection between performer and crowd that made concerts transcendent. They didn't know they were about to witness something that would stay with them forever, that would be shared across social media and talked about for years to come. Daniel Foster checked his watch in the booth. 15 minutes until the planned pause in the set. He had been told George wanted an extended moment to address the crowd, something beyond the usual banter. Daniel had built in the time, adjusted the lighting plans to accommodate a more intimate setting, but he didn't know the specifics. George had kept that part close, sharing only with a few trusted people. Daniel's phone buzzed yet again. This time, it wasn't Catherine. It was his daughter, Amanda. "Dad, Mom told me about Denver. Are you going to let her go?" Let her go. As if it was his decision alone. As if Catherine was something he possessed, rather than a person with her own dreams and agency. But wasn't that the real question underneath? Was he going to fight for their marriage? Or was he going to default to his usual pattern of being reasonable, supportive, and emotionally unavailable? He typed back, "We're going to figure it out." Amanda's response was immediate. "That's what you always say. But figuring it out means someone has to be honest about what they want. When was the last time you told Mom you loved her?" Daniel stared at the question. When was the last time? He said it occasionally, usually when ending phone calls or leaving for work. But when was the last time he had said it with intention, with presence, looking into Catherine's eyes and meaning every syllable? He couldn't remember. On stage, George Strait was finishing a ballad, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience and emotion. The song was about enduring love, about choosing to stay even when it's hard, about building a life with someone through all the seasons of joy and sorrow. Rebecca Cole listened to the lyrics with new ears, hearing them not just as a song, but as a statement of philosophy. Was that the secret? Simply choosing, over and over again, to stay and to fight for what you had? But what if you had already lost it? What if the person you loved was already gone, moved on, living a separate life in which you were just a pleasant memory? The song ended. The crowd erupted in applause. George smiled, thanked them, and then his expression shifted into something more serious, more vulnerable than Rebecca had ever seen from him in a public setting. "I need to talk to you all about something," George said, and the arena quieted almost instantly, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "About my wife, Norma, about 54 years of marriage, and about what that really means." Daniel leaned forward in the booth, all thoughts of Catherine momentarily suspended. James felt his heart rate spike, his attention completely captured. Rebecca grabbed her phone, ready to document whatever was about to unfold. The audience was utterly silent, thousands of people holding their collective breath. George Strait, the king of country, the man who had guarded his privacy for decades, was about to open his heart in front of them all. And nothing would be quite the same after. George Strait stood at center stage, the spotlight casting a warm glow across his face. Behind him, the band had quietly set down their instruments, sensing that this moment required stillness. The massive arena, packed with thousands of fans, felt suddenly intimate, as if everyone present had been invited into George's living room for a conversation that mattered more than any song. He held the microphone loosely, his other hand hanging at his side. For a man who had performed in front of millions over the course of his career, he looked unexpectedly vulnerable. There was no guitar to hide behind, no energetic song to channel his emotions through. Just George, the crowd, and whatever truth he was about to share. 54 years ago, George began, his Texas drawl warm and deliberate. "I was a scared kid who knew I'd found something I couldn't live without. Her name was Norma Voss, and she was the most beautiful girl in Pearsall, Texas. Still is, far as I'm concerned." Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd, and George smiled. But it was a smile tinged with emotion that made Rebecca Cole's journalistic instincts sharpen. This wasn't a rehearsed story. This was something raw. "Norma's here tonight," George continued, and a spotlight swung to illuminate a private box where an elegant woman with silver hair sat, her hand pressed to her chest, tears already visible on her cheeks. The crowd erupted in applause, and Norma smiled through her emotion, waving briefly before the spotlight returned to her husband. "I've spent most of my career keeping my private life private," George said. "It wasn't because I didn't appreciate you all, or because I thought I was better than anyone else. It was because I knew that what Norma and I had was sacred, and I wanted to protect it. I still do. But tonight, I'm going to break my own rule, because there's something I need to say, something I need her to hear, and something I think maybe some of you need to hear too." Daniel Foster felt his throat tighten. In the production booth, surrounded by monitors and equipment, he was completely focused on the man on stage, on the words that were about to be spoken. "Marriage isn't what people think it is," George said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "It's not constant happiness. It's not always easy. There are times when it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. There are times when you fail each other, disappoint each other, hurt each other, even when you don't mean to. James Walker, standing in the wings with his guitar hanging from his shoulder, felt each word land like a physical touch. This was the truth Kelly had tried to tell him. The reality he had been too stubborn or too scared to acknowledge. "When you're in this business," George continued, "you're gone a lot. You miss birthdays and anniversaries. You miss the everyday moments that make up a life. And the person you love is back home, holding everything together, supporting your dream while their own dreams get pushed to the side." Norma was crying openly now, and several audience members were wiping at their own eyes. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was witness. "Norma has given up so much for me," George said, and his voice cracked slightly. He paused, collecting himself, and the silence in the arena was absolute. "She's raised our children when I was on the road. She's comforted me through losses and celebrated successes that wouldn't have been possible without her. She's been patient when I didn't deserve patience. She's forgiven me when I should have known better. And she's loved me. Fiercely, completely, unreasonably, even when I made it hard." Rebecca Cole was typing furiously on her phone, capturing quotes. But more than that, she was feeling the weight of these words personally. This was what she and Patrick had never done. Acknowledged the difficulty, named the failures, chosen love anyway. "I'm not standing up here to tell you I've been a perfect husband," George said. "I haven't. There have been times I chose the road over home. Times I let my career come before my marriage. Times I took Norma for granted, assuming she'd always be there no matter what I did or didn't do." Daniel thought of Catherine in Denver, of a promotion that represented years of her hard work, of his silence when she had asked him to fight for their marriage. "But here's what I have learned," George continued, his eyes finding Norma's across the distance of the arena. "Love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing. Every single day, you wake up, and you choose that person. You choose to stay when leaving would be easier. You choose to forgive when holding a grudge would be more satisfying. You choose to be vulnerable when protecting yourself seems smarter." James felt his hands trembling slightly. When was the last time he had chosen Kelly? Really chosen her? Not just gone through the motions of marriage while his heart and mind were elsewhere? "Norma, I haven't always chosen well," George said, and tears were running down his face now, his voice rough with emotion. "I've let you down. I've made you second when you should have been first. And you would have been justified in walking away more times than I can count." The audience was completely silent, except for occasional sniffles. This was beyond anything they had expected from a country concert. This was a man's soul laid bare. "But you didn't walk away," George said. "You stayed. You fought for us, even when I wasn't fighting as hard as I should have been. You loved me through my failures and my fears, and you showed me what commitment really means, not the absence of struggle, but the determination to work through struggle together." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "I'm 73 years old, and I'm still learning how to be the husband you deserve. But I want you to know, in front of all these people, that you are the greatest gift of my life. Not the awards, not the sold-out shows, not the #1 hits. You, us, the life we've built together, imperfect and beautiful and real." George's voice strengthened, filled with passionate conviction. "I love you, Norma Strait. I love you more today than I did 54 years ago, because now I understand the weight of that love. I understand what it means to choose and be chosen, to stay and be stayed with. You are my home, my anchor, my reason. And if I never sing another song, never step on another stage, I will still be the richest man alive because I get to be your husband." The arena exploded. People were on their feet, applauding, crying, holding on to their own partners. Norma had her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. The emotion in the room was palpable, overwhelming. A collective catharsis that nobody had anticipated. Daniel Foster sat in the production booth with tears streaming down his face, not caring who saw. In that moment, everything became clear. Catherine wasn't asking for grand gestures or perfect solutions. She was asking for exactly what George had just given Norma: an honest acknowledgement of failure, a public declaration of priority, a commitment to choose her above everything else. Rebecca Cole had stopped typing. Her phone sat forgotten in her lap, as she watched George Strait prove that the most powerful love stories weren't the easy ones. They were the ones where people failed and forgave, struggled and stayed, chose and were chosen despite all the reasons not to. This was the article she needed to write, not about the secret to lasting love, but about the courage it takes to keep choosing love when it's hard, when you're tired, when you've screwed up, and don't know if you can be forgiven. James Walker felt something crack open in his chest. He thought of Kelly, of the woman he had promised forever to, and then slowly abandoned through 1,000 small choices to prioritize everything else. The divorce was final, yes, but that didn't mean the story was over. It just meant he had a different question to ask now. Did he have the courage to admit he'd been wrong? To ask for another chance, not because he deserved one, but because he finally understood what love actually required? On stage, George wiped his eyes and looked out at the crowd. "I'm sorry," he said with a small, self-deprecating laugh. "This wasn't supposed to be a crying session. But I'm 73, and I've learned that some things are worth saying out loud, even if it makes you cry, even if it makes you vulnerable, even if it's scary as hell." The crowd laughed through their tears, loving him more in this moment than in any perfectly executed performance. "The reason I'm telling you all this," George said, his voice regaining some of its strength, "is because I look out at this crowd, and I see a lot of couples. I see young people just starting out, middle-aged folks in the thick of it, older couples who've weathered storms I can only imagine. And I want you to know that it's worth it. The struggle, the sacrifice, the daily choice to love someone, even when they're driving you crazy. It's worth it." He pointed out toward the audience. Don't wait until you're 73 to tell the person you love that they matter more than anything else. Don't wait until you're on a stage in front of thousands to make your feelings known. Do it tonight. Do it tomorrow. Do it every day for the rest of your life. George's expression softened as he looked back up at Norma. "I've written a lot of love songs over the years, but the greatest love song I'll ever create is the life I've lived with you, Norma. Imperfect and messy and absolutely beautiful. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like." The applause was thunderous, sustained, filled with genuine emotion. People weren't just celebrating George and Norma. They were celebrating their own relationships, their own struggles and triumphs, their own choices to stay, or their regrets about leaving. Daniel Foster made a decision. He pulled out his phone and texted Catherine, "Don't take the job. Not because I'm asking you to sacrifice, but because I'm ready to make you my priority. We need to talk tonight when I get home. I love you, and I've been a fool to make you doubt that." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a response. "I'll be waiting." Rebecca Cole opened a new note on her phone and typed the opening line of her article. On a November night in San Antonio, country legend George Strait did something revolutionary. He told the truth about love, not as a fairy tale, but as a daily choice that requires courage, humility, and the willingness to be transformed by another person's grace. James Walker stood in the wings and pulled out his own phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Kelly's name. His thumb hovered over the call button. Terror and hope warred in his chest. She might not answer. She might tell him it was too late. But George's words echoed in his mind. Don't wait. He pressed the call button. On stage, George Strait picked up his guitar, smiled through the tears still wet on his face, and said, "Now, I think I'd better sing you all a song before you think this whole concert is just going to be me crying about my feelings." The crowd roared with laughter and applause. The band picked up their instruments. The show continued. But everything had changed. In the space of 10 minutes, George Strait had done more than perform. He had taught, testified, and transformed an arena full of people by simply being honest about the hardest and most important work of his life, loving Norma Strait through 54 years of imperfection and grace. The rest of the concert would be beautiful. But it was that moment of raw truth that would echo long after the last note faded and the lights came up. The final songs of George Strait's set carried a different energy than the first hour. The music was still excellent, the performance still professional, but now there was an added layer of emotional depth that transformed even the most familiar songs into something sacred. When George sang about love, about home, about choosing to stay, every person in the Frost Bank Center heard those lyrics differently. Daniel Foster remained in the production booth, managing the technical elements of the show with his usual competence, but his mind was already at home. He kept checking his phone, looking at Catherine's response. "I'll be waiting." 4 simple words that contained multitudes. Hope, fear, possibility, risk. 23 years of marriage. How had he let it deteriorate to the point where his wife felt she needed to move to another state just to feel valued? How had he become so efficient at managing everyone else's big moments that he had forgotten to create any with the woman he loved? His assistant, Jennifer Park, noticed his distraction. "You okay, boss? You seem somewhere else." Daniel looked at her. This 26-year-old who was brilliant at her job, but still believed love could be simple. "George's speech," he said. "It got to me." Jennifer smiled. "Got to everyone. My boyfriend's been texting me from the crowd. He said half the arena is crying." "Jennifer, can I ask you something?" Daniel said, surprising himself. "If the person you loved was drifting away, but you had a chance to pull them back, would you take it, even if it meant making big changes to your life?" She didn't hesitate. "In a heartbeat. The job stuff, the logistics, all of that. You can figure that out. But if you lose the person, you can't get them back." "Not really." Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah, you're right. Is everything okay with you and Mrs. Foster?" Jennifer asked, concern crossing her face. "It will be," Daniel said. And for the first time in months, he actually believed it. "As soon as this show wraps, I'm going home to make sure of it." Down in the arena, Rebecca Cole was watching the crowd as much as she was watching George. She observed couples holding each other tighter, saw people pull out their phones to text or call, witnessed quiet conversations between partners who had been jolted into awareness by George's honesty. This was the real story, not just George's declaration, but the way it reverberated through thousands of lives, creating moments of reflection and decision. How many relationships would be saved tonight? How many people would go home and have long overdue conversations? How many would choose differently because George Strait had given them permission to acknowledge both the difficulty and the worth of committed love? Rebecca thought about her editor's demand for authenticity. Well, she had gotten it. In a form she hadn't anticipated, George had handed her the article of a lifetime. But more than that, he had given her a framework for understanding her own failed marriage. She and Patrick hadn't lacked love. They had lacked the courage to be messy, to fight, to demand more from each other. They had been so civilized in their dissolution that they had never explored whether they could salvage what they had. They had chosen ease over effort. Was it too late to revisit that choice? Probably. Patrick was dating someone new, had moved on in the way that people do when a relationship ends on good terms. But maybe she could still learn from this, could carry George's lesson into whatever came next in her life. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, though she quickly realized it must have been arranged by George's management. George can talk to you briefly after the show. 10 minutes in his dressing room. Don't waste them. Rebecca's heart rate spiked. She would need to prepare questions. But what could she ask that would add anything to what George had already given them all? Maybe that was the question itself. Why now? Why, after decades of privacy, had he chosen this moment to be so vulnerable? Backstage, James Walker stood in a quiet corner, his phone pressed to his ear, waiting. The call rang once, twice, 3 times. His heart sank with each ring, preparing for voicemail, for rejection, for the confirmation that he had waited too long. Then, on the 5th ring, Kelly answered. James! Her voice, familiar, cautious, confused, made his throat tighten with emotion. Hey, Kel, I know this is unexpected. I know I probably shouldn't be calling, but I just heard something tonight that made me realize I need to talk to you. There was a long pause. James, we're divorced. The papers are signed. What's there to talk about? Everything, James said, the word coming out more desperately than he had intended. I was wrong, Kelly. About everything. About prioritizing music over you. About thinking I could have my dream and our marriage without really choosing either of them. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry. Another pause. Longer this time. Are you drunk? No. I'm at a show, working. George Strait he said something that made me see how badly I screwed up. And I know it might be too late. I know you might have moved on, but I had to call. I had to tell you that you were right about everything. And I've been a complete idiot. He heard Kelly take a shaky breath. You can't just call me out of the blue after everything and expect. I don't expect anything. James interrupted gently. I don't have any right to expect anything. I just needed you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. And if there's even the smallest chance that we could talk, really talk, I want to take it, even if it's just to give you the apology you deserve. James, Kelly's voice broke slightly. You hurt me. You made me feel like I was competing with your guitar for your attention, and I was losing. I know, and you shouldn't have had to compete. You should have been the priority, always. I understand that now, and I want a chance to show you that I can be different. Not just promise it, but actually be different. There was a sound in the background on Kelly's end. A door closing, footsteps, the rustle of movement. Where did this come from? We've been divorced for weeks, and you haven't said any of this. I've been numb, James admitted, just going through the motions, telling myself it was over, and there was nothing I could do. But tonight, George Strait stood on stage, in front of thousands of people, and admitted he hadn't been the husband his wife deserved. He said, love is about choosing, every day, even when it's hard. And I realized I never really chose you, Kelly. Not the way I should have. But I want to, if you'll let me. The silence stretched so long that James thought she might have hung up. Then, finally, Kelly spoke, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I can trust this, James. I don't know if I can trust you. I understand, and I don't blame you. But can we at least meet? Can we talk, face to face? You can tell me exactly how I failed you, and I'll listen. Really listen. And then you can decide if you think there's anything worth trying to rebuild. Another long pause. When? James felt hope surge through his chest. Whenever you want. I'll make it work. You're the priority now, Kelly. I promise you that. Tomorrow, Kelly said. Coffee at that place we used to go to on Houston Street. 10 in the morning. I'll be there, James said immediately. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for giving me even this much. Don't thank me yet, she said. But there was something in her voice. Not quite warmth, but not complete coldness either. I'm not promising anything except a conversation. That's more than I deserve. I'll see you tomorrow. After they hung up, James stood there for a moment, his hands shaking. He had no idea if Kelly would actually give him another chance, if their marriage could be resurrected from the grave they had buried it in. But for the first time since the divorce, he felt something other than numb resignation. He felt possibility. Trevor Daniels found him a few minutes later. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I just called my ex-wife, James said, still processing it himself. Trevor's eyebrows rose. And we're meeting tomorrow to talk. I have no idea what's going to happen, but at least I'm trying. At least I'm not just accepting that it's over without fighting for it. Trevor clapped him on the shoulder, pride evident in his face. George got to you too, huh? Yeah, James said. He really did. On stage, George was bringing the show toward its conclusion. The energy in the arena was electric, but also tender, as if everyone present had been through something transformative together. When George announced the final song, the crowd groaned with disappointment, not wanting the night to end. I want to thank you all for being here, George said, his voice warm. For listening, not just to the music, but to an old man getting sentimental about his wife. Norma means the world to me, and I hope tonight I showed her that. But I also hope I showed all of you that the hard work of love is the most important work you'll ever do. He glanced up at where Norma sat, blew her a kiss, and she returned the gesture, still visibly emotional. This last song goes out to everyone who's ever chosen to stay, to fight, to love even when it's difficult. And to everyone who's thinking about making that choice right now, do it. You won't regret it. The final song was one of George's most beloved ballads, a slow dance number that had been played at countless weddings over the years. As he sang, couples in the audience held each other, swaying gently. Singles thought about people they had loved or lost or hoped to find. And everyone, in their own way, made small promises about how they would do better, be braver, choose more consciously. Daniel Foster watched from the booth, already planning how he would close down the production efficiently so he could get home to Catherine as quickly as possible. He had spent decades making sure other people's big moments went perfectly. Tonight, he was going to create a big moment of his own. Rebecca Cole prepared her questions, though she suspected the interview would take a direction she couldn't fully anticipate. George had already given her the story of a lifetime. Whatever he said next would just be context, depth, the human details that would help readers understand the courage it took to be that vulnerable. James Walker packed up his gear with hands that were steadier than they had been in weeks. Tomorrow was uncertain. Kelly might shut him down completely, might tell him there was no path back. But at least he would know he had tried. At least he wouldn't spend the rest of his life wondering what might have happened if he had been brave enough to fight for what mattered most. The final notes of the song rang out, George's voice carrying the lyric with all the weight of 54 years of lived experience. The crowd erupted in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes, people reluctant to let the night end, to step back into their regular lives. But they would take something with them. A reminder that love was worth fighting for, that vulnerability was strength, that the daily choice to stay and try was the most heroic thing any of them would ever do. George bowed, waved, thanked the crowd one final time, and walked off stage. The lights came up. The show was over. But for Daniel, Rebecca, and James, the real story was just beginning. The private dressing room backstage was modest, despite George Strait's legendary status. A comfortable space with a couch, a makeup mirror, and the quiet that comes after the roar of thousands. George sat with a towel around his neck, still wearing his stage clothes, his face showing the exhaustion of emotional catharsis. Norma sat beside him, their hands intertwined, and the intimacy between them was palpable even before any words were spoken. Rebecca Cole entered with her recording device, notebook, and a sense that she was stepping into sacred space. George's manager had been clear: 10 minutes, no more. But Rebecca suspected that even 10 seconds in this room would provide more truth than hours of typical celebrity interviews. "Thank you for making time," Rebecca said, settling into the chair across from them. I don't even have words for what that was." George smiled tiredly. "I didn't exactly plan it that way. But once I started talking, I couldn't stop." "Why tonight?" Rebecca asked, getting straight to the heart of her curiosity. "You've protected your privacy for decades. What made you decide to open up now?" George glanced at Norma, and something unspoken passed between them. Then he looked back at Rebecca. "A couple months ago, Norma and I were having dinner, just the two of us. And she said something that shook me. She said, 'George, I know you love me, but sometimes I wonder if anyone else knows how hard we've worked for this.'" Norma squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. "I didn't mean it as a criticism, I see so many people struggle with marriage, especially in this business. And I thought maybe if they knew it wasn't easy for us either, that we've had our struggles, maybe it would help someone." "I realized she was right," George continued. "I've spent my career singing love songs, and people assume that means my relationship is perfect. But perfect isn't real. What's real is choosing each other every day, even when you're tired, even when you're frustrated, even when you've disappointed each other." Rebecca scribbled notes, then looked up. "What would you say to someone who's at the point where they're not sure they can keep choosing? When the work feels too hard?" George was quiet for a moment, considering. "I'd say that you have to be honest about whether you're in a relationship that's difficult, because all real relationships are difficult, or whether you're in a relationship that's damaging you. Those are two different things, and it's important to know the difference." Norma nodded. "But if it's the first one, if it's just hard because life is hard and people are complicated, then the work is worth it. Because the alternative is either being alone or starting over with someone new. And eventually, it'll be hard with them too. That's just what love is." "What's been the hardest part for you?" Rebecca asked. George didn't hesitate. "The times when I knew I was making the wrong choice, but made it anyway. When I chose the tour over being home. When I let my pride stop me from apologizing when I should have. Those are the moments I regret. Not because they ended us, but because they hurt Norma unnecessarily." "And for you, Norma?" Rebecca turned to the woman who had been George's partner through it all. Norma took a breath. "The loneliness. Not just physical loneliness, though that was real, but the loneliness of knowing that everyone saw George as belonging to them, to his fans, and his career. I had to fight sometimes to remind both of us that he belonged to me first, to our family first. That wasn't always easy." "But you stayed," Rebecca said softly. "I stayed because underneath all the difficulty, there was something true," Norma said. "George has always been a good man, even when he was a flawed husband. And I knew he loved me, even when he didn't show it perfectly. So I made the choice to stay and to keep working. And he made the same choice. And here we are, 54 years later. Rebecca felt her throat tighten. This was what she and Patrick had been missing. Not the perfection, but the determination to work through imperfection. "What would you want people to take away from tonight?" Rebecca asked. George looked directly at her, his eyes clear and honest. That it's okay to struggle, that struggling doesn't mean you've failed, and that the most important thing you can do is keep showing up, keep being honest, keep choosing love even when it's the harder option. The manager knocked on the door. Time was up. Rebecca stood, thanking them both, knowing she had what she needed for the article. But more than that, she had a map for her own life going forward. Several miles away, Daniel Foster pulled into his driveway with his heart pounding. The house lights were on, and through the window, he could see Catherine in the kitchen. She had waited up, just as she had said. He sat in the car for a moment, gathering his courage. This was scarier than producing any show, more vulnerable than any professional risk he had ever taken. But George's words echoed in his mind. Don't wait until you're 73 to tell the person you love that they matter more than anything else. Daniel walked into the house. Catherine turned from the counter where she had been making tea, and they looked at each other across the kitchen. The same kitchen where she had told him about Denver, where their most important conversations always seemed to happen. "Hi," he said, suddenly feeling like a teenager on a first date. "Hi," she replied, her expression guarded but not closed off. That was something. Daniel crossed the room and did something he hadn't done in years. He took both her hands in his and looked directly into her eyes. "I've been a terrible husband. Not because I don't love you, but because I stopped showing you that you were my priority. I let work consume me, let myself believe that providing and succeeding was the same as being present. But it's not." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak, letting him continue. "Tonight, I watched George Strait stand in front of thousands of people and admit that he had failed his wife in big and small ways. And he said that love is a choice you make every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And I realized, I haven't been choosing you, Catherine. Not really. Not the way you deserve." "Daniel," she started, but he gently squeezed her hands. "Please, let me finish. You asked me if I wanted you to stay, if I was willing to fight for us. The answer is yes. Absolutely yes. I don't want you to turn down Denver because it's inconvenient for me. I want us to figure out how we make it work together. Maybe that means I scale back my work. Maybe it means we move to Denver. Maybe it means something we haven't thought of yet. But whatever it is, we decide together, as partners who are choosing each other." A tear rolled down Catherine's cheek. "I don't want to move to Denver if it means losing you. But I also don't want to stay in San Antonio and resent you for it." "Then we find a third option," Daniel said firmly. "We get creative. We prioritize our marriage above both our careers and figure out how to build a life that honors both of us. Because losing you would be the biggest failure of my life. And I'm not going to let that happen without fighting for you with everything I have." Catherine pulled one hand free and wiped at her eyes. "I've felt so invisible for so long. I need to know this isn't just a temporary surge of emotion because of a concert. I need to know you'll still choose me next week, next month, next year." "I will," Daniel said, "and I'll prove it, starting right now. Tell me about the Denver job. Tell me what excites you about it. Tell me your dreams, and let's figure out how to make them real without sacrificing us." They talked for 3 hours that night, sitting at the kitchen table with cold tea, finally having the conversation they should have been having for years. They didn't solve everything. Real life wasn't that simple. But they made a start. And for the first time in months, Daniel felt like they were partners again. A team facing challenges together rather than individuals drifting apart. By the time they went to bed, curled together in a way they hadn't been in far too long, they had a plan. Catherine would negotiate a hybrid arrangement with the Denver company. Daniel would cut back his travel schedule, and they would see a marriage counselor to work through the patterns that had almost destroyed them. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs. The next morning, James Walker sat at a small table in the coffee shop on Houston Street, arriving 15 minutes early because he was too nervous to wait at home. He had rehearsed a dozen different opening lines, then abandoned them all. George had been right. You couldn't script honesty. You just had to be brave enough to speak from the heart. Kelly arrived exactly at 10, looking beautiful and guarded in equal measure. She ordered a coffee, sat down across from him, and waited. "Thank you for coming," James said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Kelly admitted. "But your call last night, you sounded different. And I guess I needed to know if that was real, or if I was just hearing what I wanted to hear." James took a breath. "It's real. Kelly, I have spent the last 6 weeks telling myself that our divorce was inevitable, that we just weren't compatible, that the damage was too deep to repair. But the truth is, the damage was caused by my choices, by me consistently choosing music over you, career over relationship, my dreams over our partnership." Kelly's expression didn't soften, but she didn't interrupt either. Last night, George Strait, this legend, this man who's been married for 54 years, stood on stage and said that he hadn't always been the husband his wife deserved. He said he had failed her, disappointed her, taken her for granted. And he said that love is a daily choice, and he had to learn to choose better. "James, George Strait isn't divorced," Kelly said quietly. "We are. What are you asking me for here?" "A chance," James said simply. "Not to go back to how things were, because how things were wasn't working. A chance to start over, with me being different. Really different, not just promising to be different." "How do I know you can actually change?" Kelly asked, and the pain in her voice was evident. "How many times did you promise to come home earlier, to be more present, to make me a priority? And how many times did something else come up that was just this once important?" "You don't know," James said honestly. "I can't prove it with words. I can only prove it with sustained action over time. But I'm asking you to give me the opportunity to try. We could start with counseling, with dating again, with me showing up consistently and putting you first. And if I fail, if I slip back into old patterns, you walk away knowing you gave it every chance." Kelly was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I loved you so much, James. Do you know how much it hurt to feel like I was competing with your guitar? Like I was an obligation you checked off your list, rather than the person you most wanted to be with." "I know," James said, his voice thick. "And I'm so sorry. I was an idiot who thought I could have everything without really choosing anything. But I'm ready to choose now. I'm ready to choose you, to show you that you're not competing with music, because you're more important than music. You're more important than anything." "I don't know if I can trust that," Kelly said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now, a crack in the wall she had built. "Then let me earn your trust back," James said. "Slowly, carefully, one choice at a time. I'm not asking you to move back in or to pretend the divorce didn't happen. I'm asking for coffee dates and honest conversations and the chance to show you that I've learned from losing you. Kelly looked at him for a long time, and James could see the war happening behind her eyes. The desire to protect herself versus the lingering love she still felt. The fear of being hurt again versus the hope that maybe, just maybe, people could change. 1 month, she finally said. You get 1 month to show me this is real. We'll meet for coffee, for dinner, we'll talk. But I'm not making any promises, James. And if you cancel even once, if you prioritize work even one time, we're done. For good. Relief washed over James so powerfully, he almost cried. 1 month. I promise you won't regret giving me this chance. I might, Kelly said, but she smiled slightly. But I guess I need to know either way. They talked for 2 hours, carefully sharing what the last 6 weeks had been like for each of them, beginning the slow process of rebuilding communication. When they left, James didn't try to hug her or push for more than she had offered. He just thanked her again and watched her walk to her car, feeling something he hadn't felt since before the divorce. Hope. Rebecca Cole's article published 3 days later in the Austin Chronicle, and within hours, it had been shared thousands of times across social media. The headline read, George Strait and the Courage to Choose. What Country's King Can Teach Us About Real Love. The piece was beautiful, honest about the difficulty of marriage, clear-eyed about the work it required, but ultimately hopeful about the possibility of lasting love if people were brave enough to be vulnerable and consistent enough to keep choosing. Rebecca received hundreds of emails in response. People shared their own stories of struggling marriages, of near divorces averted, of learning to love better. Several people mentioned they had been at the San Antonio show and had gone home to have difficult but necessary conversations with their partners. One email stood out. It was from Patrick, her ex-husband. Rebecca, I read your article. It was beautiful and honest, just like everything you write. I've been thinking about what you wrote, about the courage it takes to fight for love even when it's hard. We didn't fight, did we? We were so civilized, so reasonable, that we never explored whether we could work through our problems rather than just amicably ending things. I'm not saying we should get back together. We've both moved on. But I wanted you to know that I see now that we gave up too easily. And I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for us. I hope you find someone who chooses to fight, who chooses you every single day. You deserve that. Patrick. Rebecca cried when she read it. Not because she wanted to reunite with Patrick, but because the acknowledgement meant something. They had both been at fault. They had both chosen the easy path. And while they couldn't undo that choice, they could learn from it and do better next time. She wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I think we both needed to learn this lesson even if we had to learn it apart rather than together. I hope you're happy, Patrick. And I hope I'm brave enough next time to choose the mess and struggle of real love instead of the comfortable distance we settled for." 2 months later, Daniel Foster turned down a lucrative production contract that would have required him to be on the road for 6 months. Instead, he took a position as a consultant that allowed him to work primarily from home. He and Catherine were in counseling together, working through decades of accumulated patterns, learning to communicate in ways they never had before. It wasn't always easy. Some weeks were harder than others. Some sessions brought up painful truths. But they were doing it together, and that made all the difference. Catherine had negotiated a hybrid role with the Denver company that required her to travel 2 weeks per month, and Daniel had arranged his schedule so he could travel with her when possible, turning her business trips into opportunities for them to explore a new city together. Their daughters noticed the change. Amanda called one night and said, "Dad, I don't know what happened at that George Strait concert, but Mom is happier than I've seen her in years. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Daniel promised he would. James Walker and Kelly had their coffee dates, their dinners, their long conversations. James kept every single commitment, turned down work opportunities that would have interfered with their time together, and showed Kelly through consistent action that she was his priority. It wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when Kelly's trust wavered, times when James had to prove himself all over again. But he didn't give up. And slowly, carefully, Kelly began to believe that maybe people could change, that maybe their story didn't have to end in divorce. 6 months after their first coffee shop meeting, Kelly agreed to move back in with James. They remarried in a small ceremony a year later, with Trevor Daniels as the best man. Trevor's toast was simple: to second chances, to the courage to change, and to George Strait for teaching us all that love is worth fighting for. Rebecca Cole continued writing, but with a different perspective. She was more willing to be vulnerable in her work, to share her own failures alongside her observations about others. Her writing became even more powerful because it came from a place of hard-won wisdom rather than detached analysis. She started dating someone new, a teacher named Michael Chen who was divorced himself and understood the work that real relationships required. They took things slowly. Both of them committed to doing it differently this time, to choosing each other consciously rather than just falling into comfortable patterns. And George and Norma Strait continued their life together, private as always except for that one night when they had shared their truth with the world. The video of George's declaration went viral, watched by millions, shared at weddings and anniversaries, held up as an example of what real love looked like. But for the people who had been there that November night in San Antonio, for Daniel and Catherine, for James and Kelly, for Rebecca and the countless others who had heard those words and let them change their lives, it was more than a viral moment. It was a reminder that the greatest love stories aren't the easy ones. They're the ones where people fail and forgive, struggle and stay. Make the daily choice to love even when it's hard. They're the stories where vulnerability is valued over perfection, where honesty creates intimacy, where the determination to keep choosing transforms ordinary people into heroes of their own lives. George Strait had given them permission to acknowledge that marriage was hard work, but more importantly, he had shown them that the work was worth it, that the daily choice to love was the most important and most courageous choice any of them would ever make. And in living rooms and coffee shops, in counseling sessions and quiet conversations, people kept making that choice, kept fighting for their relationships, kept believing that love, real, messy, imperfect love, was worth every bit of effort it required. The legacy of that night wasn't just a powerful speech or a viral video. It was thousands of small decisions made by ordinary people who had been inspired to choose love, to be brave, to fight for what mattered most. And that was the most beautiful love song of all.